Hello, hi, what's up? It's me, Karen, your favorite booktuber, and I've had a long day of filming, and I'm a little worried that I might lose my voice in this video, but it's okay. It's all for you guys. I read a total of 13 books, and it was a very interesting mix. I read 2 Christmas London romance books. I've read some McNally books. I've read Jane Austen. I also read some really random books because we are doing a readathon in Plek. It's called Plekathon, and that inspired me to pick up some books I wouldn't otherwise have done because they were worth a lot of points, and I am here to deliver for my team. Okay, having said that, there are 2 books that I read in the month of November that I do want to share with you guys because they were part of my Secret Santa gift that I gave, and it's important that I talk about them because I do think that they were really interesting. So the first one that I read at the end of November that I want to talk about is Eurotrash. This is translated. Our author, I believe, is working in the realms of autofiction, and this book comes in the wake of his other work that was quite autofictitious, but I did not pick that up. I just picked this up because I loved this cover. It's something. And this tells a story of our narrator who's, a writer. He is the same guy basically, but not, and he's in Zurich where his mother lives, and he's visiting his mother, and he has a bit of an estranged relationship with his mother. His mother's like in her late 80s, and he describes her as kind of crazy, that she's a bit unhinged. She spends her time popping pills and drinking vodka. She lives alone. She has a caretaker that will come in and check on stuff for her, but he's thinks that the caretaker steals from his mother, but he doesn't do anything to rectify that. And when he goes to visit his mother, he decides to do something bold. It just like comes upon him, this desire to go on a last trip with her. So they end up taking money from her bank account, like all of it, and it's a big amount, and they decide to go across a journey through Europe. They don't really end up doing that. They end up just going to I think his childhood home and one other destination, and they have some like hijinks along the way. They almost get all the money almost gets stolen. They try to give the money away. Having said this is very similar to another book that I read in the month of December. Similar but not. They're working with the same ideas, but we'll get there. And he's also like mining his past, and he has an illustrious past in the sense that his grandfather had some Nazi, sympathies, and his mother was raped at the age of 11 by a neighborhood man, and also the narrator himself experienced sexual abuse when he was a student in Canada at a boarding school. And so he's like mining through that. He's looking at his father and the ways that his parents divorced, and also like really contemplating class and what does it mean to be from Switzerland and to be neutral, but to exist in this space. And there's kind of a little bit of like a Welbeckian sort of vibe at times. Like with a few of the sentences, I could see those, like some of those ideas there and some here, like somewhat not in like being in dialogue with each other. They're not exactly similar in sentiment. And then the novel ends, and I think it could have been longer. I think we could have made the stakes a little bit higher. I would have loved to have actually seen them go to Africa as the mother wanted to go one last time to go on a safari. And there's a way in which the narrator author has some very conflicting feelings about their mother. He kind of is just like, she's crazy, I love her, we are having like a great conversation, great vibe, and then it ends and he leaves her at a psychiatric ward. Sorry, I'm spoiling it for you, but it is what it is. And I just found myself thinking that I don't think the mother's crazy or that mean. And I wasn't convinced on that. And I feel like a lot of the novel kind of needs to hinge on that premise. Yet, whenever the mother would speak, I thought she was quite lucid, maybe cutting at times, but what's wrong with that? So those were kind of my thoughts on this book. Then I picked up Emily Dickinson, Face to Face. This is really interesting because this is a portion of a memoir. the author, Martha Dickinson Bianchi, is Emily Dickinson's niece. She has the position to have intimately known Emily Dickinson, and so she's able to have these really just the details that a layman wouldn't have. And she talks about how Emily Dickinson was like someone she could turn to, who would treat her as an equal, who loved children, who would entice their imagination, who would listen to them, who could speak about these high, big ideas, and was so smart and so clever in the ways in which there are some allusions to how people outside thought that Emily Dickinson was crazy, but to them, Emily Dickinson was just, their aunt. And she would bake them cookies, and she loved to shower them with attention, and she was someone who was questing for truth. And then towards the end, we get some conversations about how the heartbreak of Emily Dickinson's life was something that outsiders love to focus on, but the narrator is just like, it was not something that my mother and the people who knew her, who all knew what the situation was, they just didn't think it was something that defined her. So it wasn't something they focused their attention on. And I think I was really taken by the writing in this, because I do think there were some sentences that I was like, oh, this is like magnificently created. This is a great sentence. This is a challenging sentence to parse through. And I think the author just really had, on the prose level, stunning. I'm trying to find a good example. This is on page 50. I've just randomly picked this one. The early recollections we children had of Aunt Emily's lines as she sent them to our mother grew in understanding year by year. The real perception of her came much as a feeling of snow in the air to those New England born, by a conviction within long before the first flakes leaves the sky. Our immature pity for her self-imposed rigors, the narrow confines of her straitened life, deepened, became aware of her concern with dimensions beyond our conceiving. The perspective had changed. We were those hemmed in. Aunt Emily was free to her chosen horizon. However life might obstruct in her feet, her spirit knew its way out. She had found and taken the one way her boat could sail, straight toward its sea. A mystic in that she grew so closely in contact with hidden forces, it was almost a psychic experience to get the manifestations she did. Yet her hold on the outward realities never weakened. Yeah, I think that's kind of like a testament to what some of that writing is, and the ways in which she is describing her childhood experiences, but also sometimes pairing them back to other people's perceptions of her. There is also a line where she says, and I think this is very defining of the book, where she's like, when I was young, Aunt Emily said to her, no one can imprison a Dickinson because a Dickinson has her imagination. And yeah, it was just such an interesting read, and made me want to read more Emily Dickinson poetry. After that, I read a collection of short stories. This is Ghost Roots. These stories are all concerned with, these stories are all set in Nigeria, and there's 12 stories in here, and these do work in conversation with Mouth by Puloma Ghosh, and that they are concerned with women often, but also I think that there's a way in which the expectations set on women and also men, because there are a few stories there, like expectations is a big motif running through this. There's a story of this young boy who's has these like 3 sort of imaginary spiritual friends that other people can also see, and his mother starts to demand that he take things from them, and he does it because he wants to help his mother, but then that expectation starts to weigh on his mind because he's seeing the ways in which he's inflicting his imaginary friends, and that's like kind of indicative of what a lot of these stories are. It's looking at the ways. Another story is of this young girl whose mother sent her off to work as a maid, and she feels like her mother never asked her, and she's doing this for her mother, and then this other woman kidnaps her, and she's like constantly having to contend with the expectations that other people place on her, and the sacrifices one has to make, and the ways in which we put people into these roles and into these set guidelines, and they have to act them out. There's another story of a woman who's sort of being haunted or just acting out evil, and it's kind of wondering like, well, why is she doing that when she's always been someone who's been considered so nice and so kind? And that's kind of like something that's really reoccurring in here. And also the ways in which this idea of like, what does it mean to be a daughter or a son, and like how do you fulfill that role? That was what was really big in here. After that, I read 3 Christmas holiday romance books. I made a dedicated video for them. spoiler, that video did not do very well, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. But of the three, there was one I really enjoyed. And when I watched that video back, I can see the way in which my face really lights up because I was so just enamored with one of them. The first that I read was The 12 Dates of Christmas. All of these romance books that I read are set in London primarily. And so in the 12 Dates of December, we're introduced to our narrator who's decided that she's going to go on 12 dates in December. She's like signed up for this dating program. And it's her going across these like 12 dates and the various escapades one gets into and the ways in which some of the men are mean, some of the men are still in love with their former girlfriends, whatever it is. And she realizes that she's in love with her best friend, and that's that romance. This is like delivers hardcore on the Christmas vibes, but I was not sold on the romance. I did not like the guy she ends up with. The next book that I read was We Met in December. Now this one is, the book takes place across a year, and it tells a story of two flatmates who are sharing, like living in this house share, and they have feelings for each other, but they don't act on them because there's a rule in the house that there's can be no relationships, you know. And so you see the ways in which they're like forming this friendship, and then they end up getting together at the end of it because it's romance. But it did not have a lot of Christmas vibes. I also thought that because we switch points of view here, both the man and the woman are so similar, so boring, not high stakes. And anytime we could have had any stakes or tension, the author would go like hard left and just cruising, chill vibes. The next book that I read was Meet Me in London. And this book is technically written by an individual who was in Made in Chelsea, a reality TV show. So this Meet Me in London is a story of this young girl who's a designer living in like a little area of London, and she meets this rich guy who's opening up a department store in her neighborhood, and they go off on this like fake dating situation where she pretends to be his fiance, and you can see the smile, it's so big. I just thought this one was really charming. It was so fun. It was just, you get to see that the narrator, she has like this past trauma that we're unpacking a little bit that defines a lot of the ways in which she moves in life, and she has some trust issues because of that, and also because of her former flame. And this guy is really dedicated and devoted to his family, and you see the girl starts to fall in love with his parents and just be like, oh, they're such great people. And I thought it was a lot of fun. It really made me happy. The next book that I read was Willful, Disregard. Now this was a book that was mentioned just like once, I think, in my writing group a couple months ago, and I stumbled across it in the bookstore and I was like, oh, I need this. This goes in tandem with books about relationships. So If Only by Vigdis, Kairos by Jenny Urbanbeck, and some Annie Ernaux kind of books. This is like along those lines, because this is the story of a young woman, she's 30 years old, who gets into a situationship with an artist who's a few years older than her. And there's a way in which this is written, because the young woman is kind of like a critic, an intellectual. She writes a lot of articles. Her and this guy, they're able to talk about their emotions or the situation in very almost like philosophical language. So you don't feel bogged down in the emotions per se, even though the narrator is going through the emotions that one goes through in a situationship, which is a lot of just yearning, pining, whatever. The author does something really interesting where, instead of having us listen to the narrator talk to her friends and like get the advice from them, those characters are all submerged into one, and they're called the girlfriend chorus. So it'll be like the girlfriend chorus says that he'll come back to me one day, I just need to like act cool, be hands off, and he'll come back. Oh, now the girlfriend chorus says this. Or the narrator will be like, I decided not to listen to the girlfriend chorus and I didn't even tell them that this happened. And so you're just seeing this relationship in the ways in which the author feels mystified that the guy is not who she thought he really was, but also she knows that, and she's like, because I love him, I'm able to see things and like accept his flaws. And it's just really interesting. And then I discovered that there's a sequel, and then there's also a third one that's going to come out soon. So I got the sequel. I plan on reading that hopefully soon, and then I want to get my hands onto the third one. I guess what happens in the second one is that she ends up getting into another relationship with an unavailable guy, and yeah, that's stay tuned for me when I read that. Stay tuned for that one. After that, I read The Sister's Brother by Patrick DeWitt. Now, this was recommended to me because of a project that I'm working on, and it was suggested that I read this, so I did pick it up. And I guess you can say how I was thinking about this. I think I wrote it on the back. Let me pull it up, because I got a lot of, like, references, if you would. This is Blood Meridian meets Butcher's Crossing meets Remains of the Day, plus humor. That's like the math I'm doing here. So, Blood Meridian, because this is a Western. Butcher's Crossing, because that is a Western that looks very deeply at like one man sort of how violence changes them. Remains of the Day, because that's about a guy thinking about how life and, you know, but then there's humor. This is like kind of a wacky book, and it tells a story of two brothers, right? We have Eli and Charlie, sisters, and they are like infamous. People know their names and they know that they do violence. And our main protagonist is Eli, and I'm pretty sure it's Eli, right? Yeah, it's Eli. He's the younger brother, and he's seeing Charlie, who is really violent. And he's like, I want to get out of this life. I want to settle down. I want to own a shop and just like chill. As he's saying this, we discover that like both of them are really violent, and they do some wild shit. Like, Charlie is able to manipulate his brother and like pull on his emotions to get him to enact violence, because Eli will not let Charlie die. Like, he will defend his brother. And so they get into, you know, some issues. Charlie also has a bit of a drinking problem. It starts off, there's like this little element of humor in the beginning, because Eli discovers like how to brush his teeth and like gets into that, and that's his little hobby. And they end up like meeting, they're traveling across the West because they're hunting for, what's his name? Herman Kermit Worm, who is a bit of a chemist, thinker kind of guy, who's gone to get his fortune in the gold rush, but he has something that will actually make him successful. And the two brothers, their boss wants that thing. And so they've gone off on their journey, and the younger brother, Eli, he's kind of like, why are we doing this? Like, why are we following this evil guy? And they're like going off on that quest, and then things progress. There's like these interesting dream sequences, and there's a journal entry, so like formally that's inventive, and then also there's just like some uncanny weird elements, but also there's like a bit of humor here. Like, this isn't deep. Like, Cormac McCarthy could never write this, because their stuff is always just so like a bit heavy. This is like, has that violence, but also has a levity to it. Then this took me to my next read, which was also another Patrick DeWitt book, French Exit. And I have to say that both French Exit and, what was this book called? The Brother Sister. Both of these are concerned with intimate relationships, two brothers, a mother and her son. And I think it's interesting to consider both of these books in tandem, to look at how DeWitt mined like the spaces of those relationships in order to create two works that are very different, but also like have this levity to it. So in this one, you have Frances, the mother, and her son, whose name I forget. He is such a low-key forgettable character. What's his name? Malcolm. Okay, so Frances is 65 years old, and she's beautiful. Like, she was always been beautiful. She's incredibly glamorous. She married what is his name? She married some guy Frank, and he was, at first they were in love, hotshot lawyer, and then he becomes kind of mean, and they're unhappy, and he ends up dying, and this like sets like makes Frances a bit of a pariah, but she still has so much glamour and allure, so it's okay. And she's always considered to be someone who's a bit odd. What's interesting about this is that we don't know exactly what year this was set in. I'm gonna say it was set in 2000, and that would make Frances, she was born in what, like 1935? Yeah, I was like, I had to check that math. And so she's like a woman from a different time period. She's not meant for the life that we live currently, because she has glamour and taste, and she's quite witty in a lot of the things that she says. But when we're introduced to her, we find out that the money's all gone. They have nothing. And so what she decides to do, she decides to sell everything in the house, and they take the cash, they convert it into euros, and they move to Paris. And in Paris, she assembles this motley crew of characters. A woman who can see when people are going to die and she could talk to the dead. We have a hanger-on that she would have ignored had she been in New York and been like wealthy like she used to be. We have Malcolm's fiance comes through with her current boyfriend, and we have this detective, and like there's just all these odd things, characters get together, and then they end up having this one final night, and we're kind of like trying to figure out what's going on here, like what is up with Frances, because Frances feels she's tired of living. You're seeing her relationship with her son and how, you know, even though she neglected the son for 12 years, you know, sent him off to boarding school, she then took him back when the father died, and she's like, they're quite interdependent, they're besties, and she calls him pal, and it's quite endearing to see that, like the love that they have for each other. Yeah, so that was like this one relationship. And then having said that, when we consider Eurotrash, which is similar vibes, which is elderly rich lady and their sons, that's what's happening here. And they're both like have this kind of like absurd quality, because I think that's what happens when you're writing about rich people, allows you to do that, because sometimes like one of the things that having excessive amounts of wealth allows you to do is to just defy social conventions. And so you see the ways in which that happens here, and it sets the stage for absurdity, and there is a lot of absurdity in French Exit. But yeah, it was a chill vibe. I also read this because someone in my writing group recommended this to me, I think last year. Okay, after that, I read a book that is not published yet. Shout out NetGalley. The book is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. Let me find out when this book is releasing. This book is coming out in February 18th. On February 18th, Hungerstone is a retelling of Carmilla, but like I haven't read Carmilla, so I can't really speak to that per se, but I think it's safe to say that Hungerstone is way more sapphic, and it has like the vampiric mythos, space, energy. I really like this, though it took me a little bit to get into it, because when I first turned to it, I thought that the writing style was a bit put on. It seemed a bit forced. And then as you develop more into the novel, I think it starts to ease back a little bit more, and it feels a little bit more natural. In the beginning, it feels a little too much like artifice. But this is the story of, I think her name is Leonor, right? I don't know. Let's call her Lee. This is the story of Lee, and she's a woman whose parents died when she was really, really young, and she was set off to live with her aunt and lived in seclusion. And then when she's out in society, she decides that she needs to marry, right? And she picks a guy who they understand that this is a contract. He brings the wealth, he has new money. She brings her title and a sophistication, and they will set about to create their world. Now that they've been married for, I don't know, 5-10 years, they have a secret that ties them together, but also like a power balance, and that's very unequal. And he's really mean, super mean, and she's just unhappy in it. And they are going off to the north because he's bought an estate there and he wants to do a hunting party, whatever. And on their way there, they meet a young woman who's just been struck down in a carriage crash, and they have to take her in, and her name is Carmilla, and she's like messing the balance of power between the two. The husband wants to get rid of her, but Lee, as I mentioned, though she feels attracted but also resents Carmilla, and you're seeing their relationship in the ways in which Carmilla is pushing her towards a certain path and being like, I came to you because you're in crisis, let me help you. And the real like theme here is hunger. Naturally, the book is called Hungerstone, but Lee feels like a hunger that she cannot satiate, and food isn't helping. Her husband is feeding her these candies, that's not helping. She just wants more and more and more. And then we get to like the final little crescendo, and she satiates that hunger. And I think the book is really questioning like female agency and desire and going after what you want. And I think it was a fun read. I liked it. Yeah, that's that book. The next book that I read was Blankets by Craig Thompson. Now this is a graphic memoir, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't like graphic memoir. I've only read two, but the first one that I read was Fun Houses, which is a book that I had to read in college because, okay, in hindsight, I don't think I needed to read this, but when I got accepted into college, we were sent like these letters that was like, all incoming freshmen must read Fun House. And I took that shit seriously, you know, and I got the book, I read it, and I didn't like it. I didn't think it was anything special. I don't understand why we had to read it. And then when I was in class, no one ever spoke about it. So then I felt doubly annoyed because no one else, like, why'd you make me do that? So that was that book, but Blankets is kind of in a similar way. I only read it because of Blackathon, but so a few of these reads you'll notice, or because of that. But Blankets is the story of it's Craig, who's grown up in Minnesota, Montana, I don't know, and to quite a conservative Christian family, and he's it's tough to talk about because there's the idea of like the bed and blankets is a recurring thing when we're introduced to Craig. He's a young boy, he has his brother, him and his brother like share the same bed, and you know what happens, like escapades, and like they're annoyed with each other, but they love each other, and like when one of them is scared but doesn't want to tell the other, they'll still like sleep in the same bed, and that's like the idea. And we get this understanding that Craig feels like he has not protected his younger brother, and then there's some stuff about sexual abuse that is not like, it's like hinted at but kind of not given enough to like really entirely give us 100% confirmed answer, though you feel certain it was, that both brothers were abused by their babysitter, but like that is really just brushed under the rug and we don't return to it or really learn more about that. So then you get that, and then you move to Craig being a senior and he's contemplating what to do next in his life, and the people in his church are like, oh, you should go into the ministry, like that's a path for you. And he's kind of like reading the Bible quite a bit. He reads it every single night, and he's like contemplating what he's reading and what he's seeing, and like that happens a lot. And then he goes to Bible ski camp, I don't know, and he meets this girl and they embark on a relationship, and he goes to visit her, and maybe she's from Montana, and they're together for 2 weeks, and he like sees her life and her own family, and her parents are going through a divorce, but the father doesn't want to because he's like, we're Christian and we're not supposed to. And she's also like, you see scenes of her older sister's marriage, and like marriage is big here in relationships, and they have like a romantic tryst, but the girl is like, I need to pull back, I have so much going on, I can't. And I don't know, he just stops talking to her, and then Craig ends up leaving the church and leaving the state, but we don't really know what he does. He just goes to New York, I think, and I don't know. That was the book. Yeah, I think that there was like it's hard to speak about because there was a through line, but then it was pulled back, and I think some things could have been edited out, and I just felt a bit dissatisfied, but at least it was a quick read. After that, I read another dissatisfying read. I read Rodham by Curtis Sittenfeld, and this book was bad. It was really, 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 really bad. Oh goodness, that was a lot of reallys. This is Hillary Clinton fanfiction, and this book is asking like what would have happened if Hillary Clinton didn't marry Bill Clinton, and how she would have therefore become the first female president, which, okay, anyways, let's get into it. The first like 30%, it starts with Hillary Clinton having given her Wellesley graduation speech, and how a part of that was clipped for Life magazine. We find out her father was a meanie, but her mother was quite nice. And then we see her go off to college. I'm sorry, she was already in college, grad school at Yale. And when she's there, she meets Bill, and the first like 30% of it is their relationship and how they get to know each other. And there's a lot of sex scenes, and it was like too much. It was kind of some of those things where I can't even get into it. I'm sorry. I just feel I'm uncomfortable to discuss it because we do not need that. And I think it's like, and I wouldn't even say I'm a prude. I just feel that, and I don't even think that Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton are like venerated figures. I just think that, I don't know why we needed that. I think it could have been done way more tastefully, or less of them. There was quite a lot of them. That takes up the bulk of the first 30% of it, and then after that they break up because Hillary like starts to see that Bill has a wandering eye, cheats, and insatiable sex drive that she can't really help mitigating. And after a final little situation, they break it off, and then she goes on to do whatever she does. She's like a teacher, and then she starts to enter into, what do you call that, the Senate, and she's doing that, and then people are pushing her to get into more public office stuff, and that's like another 30%. And then it's her election, and like the first one didn't work out, but the second one is the one, and there's a scandal with some incident that occurred a couple years ago, and Bill's back, but Bill's now a tech entrepreneur, and what's his name, Trump is also there, and she's able to manipulate Trump into getting his supporters to vote for her, and she becomes president. Whoa! And now that she's in the office, she has a boyfriend, and they're like loving life in their 60s or whatever, and it was pretty bad. I just think that once the relationship has ended, right? Once we've suffered through that and gotten through that, Hillary does not experience many successful romantic relationships, and part of that is because a lot of men won't view her as an equal, and they just like kind of will treat her as if she's another guy, and she's unable to find the spark that she found with Bill, which was someone who was really into her physically but also intellectually, and it was quite like stimulating. The relationship was stimulating all the way around. But so because of that, she has a lot of unsatisfying romantic relationships, and the novelist decides that she will be single for her whole entire life. And I just personally think that, first of all, America has not voted an American president. America has not voted for a female president, but I really just don't think that this country would vote a politician who's not married. I just don't think that would happen. And so I also don't even think that if she didn't marry Bill Clinton, she would have become president. Like, I don't know. This was a weird book. Just not into this. I can't even get into it more. I'm done. We've had enough, haven't we? Okay, after that, I read a good book. I read Hunchback, which is translated from Japanese. And, okay, this is a book I also read because of NetGalley. This book comes out March 6, 2025. And I think that if you are a fan of Ottessa Moshfegh, if you are one of her more adventurous and down for whatever fans, like, this book is for you, because this book goes there. This is a story of Shaka, who has a muscle disorder, which makes it so that she has to live a very confined life. She has a wheelchair and a ventilator, and she lives within a care home that her parents established and kind of left for her, and she's super wealthy, okay? And she has like no worries financially because of the wealth that she was given to her, and she's within the confines of the care home. She's living a life courtesy of the internet, and she has a Twitter where she shit posts, and she says like wild stuff because she's like, no one will see this, like I can do whatever I want. It's her like kind of diary, if you would. And then she's also does what she calls armchair journalism, where she'll like write erotica and write these like provocative articles. And so that's how she like gets money. She's also a student, and she's feels the desire to be a student because she likes that it gives her like a title or like an occupation, if you would. And she's kind of just like has a desire to get pregnant and have an abortion. And a guy comes in and things start happening. Now, I would say I wish this book was longer, because I think it would have just like I could have been here more. I could have seen more happen towards the end. There is also some like interesting formal stuff in the sense that because the author does write erotica, like sometimes you get those and then the ending is a little ambiguous. One could take it in more than one way. This book was something that the author won a Japanese literature award for it, and yeah, I think it's just a very strong voice and point of view. After that, I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. This is a book that I actually have read before in the past. I think this is my third time reading it. The first time I read it was in high school. I probably also read it in college on my own. And then I read it just now recently. And I decided to do it on audiobook, and I think that was a good call because in the past like year I think I had tried to read it physically. But what's interesting about Pride and Prejudice is that it is a book primarily told through dialogue. And so sometimes when reading that, it's not that engaging, I found, like when I was trying to reread it. But through an audiobook, especially the audiobook that I listened to was quite good because the narrator, she did multiple voices, and I thought that was like, it was good. I liked it. And considering how many times that I've rewatched the Keira Knightley Pride and Prejudice, it was like good to go back to the source material and to like flesh out some of the things that I'd really forgotten. But Pride and Prejudice is the story of Elizabeth Bennet and her 4 other sisters, and we're looking at the ways in which her absentee parents, her mother who just doesn't have the sense and is quite flighty and, you know, silly, and the father who was quite removed and only really doted on Jane and Elizabeth, like didn't entirely set them up for success, all of the daughters, and they just, you know, just really stuck in their own la la land, if you would. Like that's what this story is really about, is looking at that like familial relationship and what are the expectations for parents, and also what are the expectations for marriage, because, you know, that's like what constitutes a good match. And Elizabeth is quite intellectually like savvy, and she's witty and she's clever, and her father at one point towards the end of the novel is like, well, you could marry this person, but I fear, because he doesn't know the whole situation at that point, he's just like, you know, you might end up in a situation like me where I married someone who was not my intellectual equal, and as a result we had the marriage that we did, and I don't want that to be the state for you. And so all of you're seeing like that play out in the way that it plays out for the different sisters. And yeah, it's like a fun book, and it kind of was like, should I read the rest of that, because this is the only Jane Austen book that I've read, I'm pretty sure. Should I read the rest of them in 2025? Yeah, those were my main takeaways there. I would have to pull out my reading journal, but it's upstairs. I had like some other thoughts. It's mostly about the state of marriage, then also the ways in which Mr. and Mrs. Bennet were not the best parents. And yeah, those are my main takeaways there. And then after that, I read my final book of 2024. Goodness, I'm already trying to end the year. And that would be Beauty and Sadness. Now, this book did make me quite sad. And I'm glad though that I read it at the end of December, because, and I mentioned this in my best books of 2024, this book starts off with one of the protagonists contemplating the end of the year. It was the 29th of December. Oki was going to Kyoto to hear the New Year's Eve bells. And so this book is looking at messy relationships. You have Oki, a man in his 50s who's a writer, thinking about his former flame, a 16-year-old girl that he had like, I don't know, a 2-year-long relationship with that was quite charged. And he got the girl pregnant, and she was quite upset by... Well, he got the girl pregnant, and then they end up breaking off their relationship, and she ends up becoming a successful painter, and she lives in Kyoto, and she has this younger protege who's quite beautiful, and they are lovers. And Oki comes back into their life because he's contemplating like the end of his life and the entirety of the work that he's created and what will last the time, and he decides he wants to see the painter again, and he goes to meet her, but she's kind of like distant. I thought that this was going to go a different way. I thought they were going to rekindle their relationship, but that's not what ends up happening. And what ends up happening is the protege decides that she wants to enact revenge on Oki and his family, and that's what we're seeing. And there's a way in which like it's not like super plotted, like we don't get like plot points per se, but like we'll get an understanding of Oki and his current familial state. And then we switch to the painter, and she's contemplating her relationship to her mother, her relationship to the child that she had and then lost, and her relationship to Oki, and then also her relationship to her present lover. And you're seeing like these conversations that are happening, which are basically all about immortality and mortality, and just the nature of art and what will survive and what won't survive. And then we get these conversations about these ancient Japanese princesses, or like a tomb, and the stones of the tomb, and like what will stay and what won't stay, and the patina on the stone. it's quite moving because you start off with this idea of the end of the year, and you know that's the turning from one year to the other, which is something, if you're watching this close to the end of the year, like these are ideas and themes that we're all sort of like on some level working with, and this concept of aging. And the female painter, she recounts a story of her mother kind of like beseeching her to get married, to move on with her life. And she says that if you don't do that, if you don't marry, who will mourn us? We will be the unmourned dead. And that's kind of like this idea of like remembering, and the art that the painter is like contemplating as she's creating her works is something that I hadn't read before in other like Japanese works. Like sometimes I find that when reading Japanese literature, there's a way in which there's a lot of distance, but I think that this was quite grounded and like didn't feel that way. And I thought like I was looking things up, and I felt just really engaged within this world. But also, though we have this like what would be really salacious, like it is really salacious, there's still something that it's like we're not really like in the emotions of the characters per se, because they are really just contemplating love, mortality, immortality, and art. And that's like what is grounding this entire work. And there is a way in which I started to do a little bit more reading of this after I finished it. There's something like very nihilistic happening here, and all of these characters, we primarily get the most from Oki and the older painter. We're seeing their concepts of time and death and art and love. And I think that if the only like, it's not entirely a perfect novel, because I do wish that we got more of the younger female protege, because she's quite beautiful and fiery, and like it's hard to really like get a proper read on her. And I think that could have been fleshed out a little bit more. But yeah, that was my month of reading. That was everything that I read in the month of December. I would love to hear from you, what you read, what you enjoyed, what you didn't like. And with that, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.